Welcome to Criminal Record, the Daily Record's weekly crime show. My name is Ruth Suter and I'm joined here by the Daily Record's crime reporter, Norman Silvester. In this episode, we'll give you a rundown of the major crime stories in Scotland over the last few days. Norman, you've been busy filling the paper from front to back with your exclusive crime stories, so I'm happy to be here today to chat to you about them. Now, on Friday, the first gangster to be convicted under Operation Portaledge was jailed for nearly 7 years. 25-year-old Liam McDermid was busted by police after he used a metal detector to find a gun on a busy Edinburgh cycle path. Norman, can you tell us a wee bit more about this case?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. The viewers and listeners to Criminal Record will be aware of this long-running violence both in Edinburgh and Glasgow that's seen firebombings, machete attacks, and businesses, homes and individuals targeted. Now, this violence is linked to a long-running feud between two Glasgow crime families, the Lyon and Daniel families, and there was a further outbreak in March this year where a specific individual, Ross McGill, who at the time was based out in Dubai, who was an associate of the Lyons family, said to have orchestrated a series of attacks on members and associates of the Daniel family, including a Mark Richardson, a convicted cocaine dealer. So the police launched an investigation, Operation Portaledge, that so far resulted in 62 arrests of individuals across Scotland, particularly Edinburgh and Glasgow. And this was the police cracking down in this organised crime-related violence. It was said that McGill had been ripped off in a cocaine deal, which had been paid for with around about £500,000 worth of fake money. He believed it was members of the Daniel family or associates of the family that were responsible. So he orchestrated, or said to have orchestrated these attacks through a kind of shadowy group called Tamil Junto, who carried out firebombings and other attacks on premises across the sort of central Scotland. So we had a case at the High Court in Edinburgh last week, Liam McDermid, as you mentioned, 25-year-old from the Magdalene area of Edinburgh, and he was under surveillance by the police at that time, and he was witnessed in an area called Roseburn Path, which, as you say, it's a converted railway track that converts the Gorgie area of Edinburgh to Ravelston Dykes, quite a long kind of walk, and he was observed along that path from the Gorgie Road end, Roseburn Street end, to the Ravelston Dykes end, using a metal detector, and subsequently it was discovered he'd done Google searches of how to operate a metal detector. But anyway, to cut a long story short, it transpired that he was using the metal detector to find a Glock handgun that had been dumped in a kind of undergrowth on that kind of that sort of cyclepath area. Was a lot of trees and shrubbery. So the police arrested him, found him in possession of also sort of found him in possession of various kind of items that sort of pointed in the direction that he was involved in organised crime. They later recovered the Glock handgun and around about 10 rounds of ammunition, which this McDermid had been searched for. This was quite I think it was about a week and a half after his arrest. They found the Glock handgun and the ammunition they'd been looking for. And he subsequently appeared at High Court Edinburgh last week. He pled guilty to being involved in serious organised crime, pled guilty to offences in connection with the Glock handgun and also the ammunition. And Lord Arthurson, who was the trial judge, sentenced him to 6 years and 9 months. We were also told that though he had a number of previous convictions, this was would have been his first prison sentence. It has a history of kind of mental health and issues and cocaine abuse. But that didn't really impress Lord Arthurson, and he took the view and was obviously clearly aware of the various violence incidents, particularly in Edinburgh, and basically said, when in sentencing, McDermid was really issuing a warning that, the good people of Edinburgh had been concerned by this violence and that he had to impose, a proper punishment to reflect, the public concerns. They also pointed out that the handgun and the ammunition had been found near a school, and this was a path where the gun and ammunition had been dumped, but it was also well used by members of the public. So, as I say, the first conviction under Operation Portaledge, we're not too sure who Liam McDermid's alliances are with. It suggested that Ross McGill is an associate, and mention was made of his allegiances to sort of mystery unnamed crime figures. But it was quite clear that the judge, when sentencing, though he didn't mention Portaledge by name, was referring to this violence. And he was basically saying, we need to set an example. I'm setting an example, and I'm giving you 6 years and 9 months in prison.
Speaking of Operation Portaledge, Norman, you were able to dig up some police figures on the policing cost of the operation so far. So, since the launch of Operation Portaledge earlier this year, it's cost Police Scotland more than £500,000.
Yes, that's correct. The violence we were talked about kind of broke out early March in the kind of Niddrie area of Edinburgh and spread through to Glasgow and other places like Trinane and Midlothian and East Kilbride, just in the outskirts of Glasgow. So police launched an operation in March, Operation Portaledge, to target this violence, organised crime violence. And we obtained figures from Police Scotland. What the figures are, it's not the overall cost of the investigation, because the police officers, they would be involved in other duties if they hadn't been kind of seconded to this inquiry. But what we were able to get was figures for overtime and sort of general travel costs. And they're standing at the moment just over £530,000. So in many respects, you could argue it's value for money. That's overtime. The officers having to do extra hours. And we don't know exactly how many officers have been deployed, but with 62 arrests, suggests it's been quite a good value for money. 62 arrests for organised crime. Many of the figures, as we've seen with Lee McDermid, a reasonably high position in the kind of organised crime group structure. So that a lot of the arrests are obviously at all levels, but some higher than others. So we've seen it's money well spent. For just over £500,000 worth of public money, we've seen 62 figures arrested. Obviously, we don't know what they're all charged with. They've still to appear in court. But it looks as though it's been a very successful and cost-effective investigation so far.
That would include several raids across the Central Belt as well.
That's correct. I mean, the police have put a lot of resources into it. We mentioned Lee McDermid earlier, that he was under surveillance. There'd be a lot of raids. There were a lot of officers deployed. There'd be forensics as well. So there'd be other costs as well. But, 62 arrests a lot. It looks like it's been a big success targeting organised crime. The only slight concern is that, there's so many people involved at this level. It shows how many people are involved in organised crime. And, for everyone that's arrested, we know there's always someone willing and able to take their place.
So elsewhere, Scotland has qualified for the World Cup, which is great news. But on the back of that, the Tartan Army have been hit with a warning to stay cautious and stay on guard, as host nation Mexico is rife with gang warfare.
Yes, I did an interview last week with Graham Pearson, who's the former Director General of the Scottish Crime and Drug Enforcement Agency, and he spent much of his career involved in investigating, targeting organised crime and crime at a very high level. And we were looking at the venues. We know Canada's a venue, USA's a venue, but as is Mexico. This is the third time Mexico has been a World Cup host, and we know that there'll be 13 games in Mexico. In fact, the opening game will be in Mexico City, the Mexican capital. Also know there'll be games in Monterrey and Guadalajara, which has been used for the World Cup before. Now, obviously, from a footballing perspective, we're all looking forward to the World Cup. There's a possibility, with the draw being made next week, that Scotland could be drawn in a group with games in Mexico. And what we're highlighting was Mexico's got a major problem just now with the government trying to tackle organised crime groups across the country. Mexico is a major hub for worldwide distribution of cocaine, and we know there's been a lot of violence and a lot of deaths in that kind of turf war between the different organised crime groups to profit from that. A couple of weekends ago, there was big demonstrations across Mexico calling for the governments to do more against organised crime. So Mr. Pearson was really just kind of warning people that if they're going to games in Mexico to be careful. Don't go places on your own. Don't go to kind of pubs in strange areas. Stay in large groups. Stay in the kind of touristy, well-known areas. Don't go kind of exploring into parts where you may fall victim to a range of crimes, including theft and robbery and what have you. In particular, we know that the area of Mexico called Jalisco, it's a region where Guadalajara is situated. There's an organised crime group called New Generation that are said to have been responsible for about 1,000 missing people in the last year. There's millions to be made, billions from the cocaine trade, which they are operating. And I think there's also concerns that people could somehow get caught up. If there's a war or a shooting or something like that, if you're in the wrong area at the wrong time. There's also suggestion, we know that Scottish organised crime groups now have got direct links with the drugs cartels in the likes of Colombia, Brazil and Mexico, and often deal directly with these cartels. And Mr. Pearson was suggesting that probably Police Scotland and other police forces in England, like the National Crime Agency, will be kind of linking up and looking at the types of supporters going over. You might find people involved in drug dealing, organised crime using the World Cup as a cover, because there'll be millions of people literally arriving in Mexico, Canada and USA, and maybe the customs checks might not be strict, and this might be a way of, under the cover of going to the games, of organised crime groups in Scotland doing business with the cartels in Mexico. And also people might be tempted. Somebody might come up to you in a pub and say, "Can you take a suitcase back to Scotland for me?" Something as simple as that. Just a general warning to people to be on their guard. I'm sure it'll be okay if you stick to the sort of well-trodden paths. But people on holiday, in a different country, they might be tempted to do something they wouldn't normally do. Again, he was kind of warning about be careful about being offered drugs, drinking in strange pubs, that kind of thing, given this kind of history of violence. And it's there to be seen the government as a major issue for the Mexican government, tackling the violence involved in organised crime. And also, even Scotland's not based in Mexico. We might be based somewhere in the USA that fans might be tempted to go over the border to go to games in likes of Guadalajara or Monterrey or Mexico City. So just to be on their guard, but also suggesting that the police generally might take an interest in fans going to Mexico City if it's people that they're aware of being involved in organised crime, using that as a cover.
That's some solid advice for our football.
Yeah, be careful, enjoy yourself, but just be careful. It might seem the stuff is safe and well. We all get carried away when we're on holiday anyway and have a few drinks. Just to be on your guard,
Absolutely. Another story from you, Norman. The family of a Scottish businessman who went missing 25 years ago say that they fear he might have been murdered over a debt that he owed to a crime clan. Joseph Connelly vanished in April in 2002. Norman, you spoke to his younger sister Caroline last week. What did she share with you?
Yeah, this is a really unusual missing person case. Joseph Connelly was a 50-year-old. He was a printer to trade, a very successful, talented printer. He lived in the Govan Hill area of Glasgow. He's from a family of 5. Bit of a character. Very successful printer. Liked to travel. We'd often go away traveling abroad, Europe, South America, you name it, and go away for maybe up to 6 months at a time. And he'd work freelance, so he'd find work as a printer wherever he was. His skills obviously transferable. You could work anywhere. He'd use that to finance his trips around the world. And he would often go away for often 6 months at a time. The family wouldn't hear from him. And then he would always be in touch round about Christmas or on birthdays. Now, in the sort of mid-1990s, he'd set up a publishing firm that published a book in 1996. Had been quite successful, and this business appeared to be quite a well-run, successful business. It was a book publishing venture. Around about 2002, he'd attended a family wedding in Letterkenny in Southern Ireland. He wasn't his usual self. Apparently Joe's normally the life and soul of the party, a real extrovert, a real personality. He appeared very subdued. It wasn't his usual kind of extrovert self. And the day after the wedding, he decided. He told his family, I'm going home. I'm going back home." And he returned with one of his brothers, and he dropped him off at his flat in Govan Hill in Glasgow. And Joseph was never seen again. Part of the problem here is because the family were used to him travelling. When they hadn't heard from him for a couple of weeks or months, they never thought anything of it. But then around about Christmas time, he hadn't been in touch with either of his sisters, including Caroline, regarding her birthday. He would always get in touch at birthday times. They didn't hear from him over Christmas. They started to get concerned and reported him missing. In the January of 2003, the police had to force entry into his house or into his flat. But what they found was basically a flat that had just been left. There was no sign of a disturbance. There was a half empty cup of coffee on the table. There was a newspaper crossword he hadn't finished. It's almost as if he disappeared into thin air. And that's what appears to have happened. He just disappeared. Now, we know he's well travelled. And he would, go away for 6 months' time, but he would always keep in touch with his family. They've heard nothing from him since. His passport had been left, a lot of other personal effects. He's never touched his bank accounts or bank books. It's almost as if he's just disappeared. It literally, as I said, disappeared without trace. What the family suspect was effectively went missing the day after, or around the time he returned to Glasgow after this wedding. We know that he had his own publishing company. He'd published this true crime book in sort of it's around about 1996. The suggestion was that he had borrowed money or owed money to some sort of organised crime group. He'd maybe borrowed money to finance the publishing venture, which it was a company actually registered in Tenerife, which was where he spent a lot of his time. He would do a lot of travelling around the Canaries and he would work in the Canaries. So he set up this publishing venture in Tenerife, though the book was a true crime, a Scottish true crime book. The suggestion was over this, he built up this debt to this organised crime group or these criminals who basically, and the suggestion is that he may have been murdered over this debt. They may have got into further trouble, maybe perhaps in relation to drug debts or something. He's maybe been persuaded to use the business to launder drug money, perhaps forced into do something like that because of the cash he actually owed over the debt in relation to the publishing venture. We don't really know. The police did tell the family that they fear they could have come to harm. They're concerned who he may have got involved with. But it's a real mystery. It's still, technically speaking, a missing person. The police had a fresh appeal for information about 3 years ago. But listen, this guy just seems to have disappeared without trace. And there's been no sightings of him since that time he was dropped off by his brother. They spoke to neighbours. He hadn't seen him much since then. Didn't see him at all. And even he was quite a local figure in bars and restaurants and well known locally, and they've not seen him either. So it's a real mystery. And what I think the family, they're accepting that they may not see him alive, they may have come to harm, they may have been murdered, but they need closure. They need to find out what's happened to him so they can get on with their lives.
It's agonising for them.
Very much so.
More than 2 decades is a long time. So elsewhere in Bothwell, a former underworld figure told us that he was mystified by a series of firebombings. So several eateries and businesses have been deliberately set on fire in the town over the last few years. You've covered this story quite extensively over the years, though, Norman. Can you give us a bit of background?
Yeah, this was actually a story my colleague Mark McGivern covered last month, and we've done a few follow-ups since then. Basically, it's centred around the village of Bothwell. Now, for people who know where Bothwell is, it's just on the outskirts of Glasgow in South Lanarkshire, sits between Glasgow and Hamilton, and it's quite an affluent village. A lot of people with money live there, a lot of business people, footballers, the odd celebrity now and then, a lot of professional people, lots of lovely kind of villas and sort of townhouses and sort of almost country style homes, but leafy driveways. It's a lovely place to live, but and a popular place with people with money. But there's been some rather bizarre happenings in the last few years. As you mentioned earlier, 4 restaurants, all on the main street. One called Neil & Co. That was firebombed last month, and it's now lying empty. It's no longer operating as a restaurant. The previous month, there was another restaurant called Cut Steak. That was set on fire, and that's now lying empty, unused. And there's been two other, there was another restaurant, the Luciano's Italian restaurant, as the name suggests, again in the village main street. That was targeted 2 years ago, set on fire. And again, it's gutted, lying empty. And there's a third restaurant called San Vincenzo's, and that was targeted numerous times, several times between 2019 2022. Again, that's lying empty, unused. It was firebombed. There was also a kind of ram raid as well. And also connected to that, there's also been attacks on people's homes and cars set on fire and homes set on fire. And we did an interview with a businessman, Hugh O'Donnell, who owns three of the restaurants, Neil and Co, Cut Steak, and the Luciano's. In fact, they're run by his wife and family, and he says he's baffled by these attacks. He doesn't know why they're happening.
Now, they're not related to Operation Portaledge, are they?
No, that's the point. This has nothing to do with the gangland war we've been discussing earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Though interesting enough, one of the sort of local business people we spoke to, because people generally are concerned about this, wondered why there'd been no arrests over these restaurant attacks, given the success of Operation Portaledge, which is targeting similar crimes where businesses have been set fire. So they don't understand why there's not been anybody arrested over these numerous attacks over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And we spoke to Mr. O'Donnell, who's a bit of a colourful past, which he says he's put behind him. He used to own the Seven Heaven, or he used to own the Seven Heaven lap dancing club in Edinburgh. He had a conviction in 2004 for running a kind of brothel. He's also was quite successfully involved in horse racing industry. He says he put that kind of sort of past behind him and effectively semi-retired. It's just a normal everyday businessman and can't understand why he's been targeted, why the restaurants have been targeted over the past few years. So it's a real mystery. There's been no arrests. And it's a strange one because it's an affluent, outwardly law-abiding town. A lot of kind of high-profile individuals live there, people with money. It's a nice place to go and live. But there's this kind of cloud hanging over of these sort of mystery firebombing attacks that nobody seems to have been arrested for.
But last week, police renewed their appeal for information for these fire attacks. So they're reappealing to anybody that's got any information to come forward.
That's right. The police they're still trying to bring people to justice for this. I think the problem is that they don't have any of these suspects. I think it's still a problem trying to establish an exact motive for it. We don't know, is it the same person that's carrying out these firebombings? Is it the same individuals that are ordering it? We've got to assume again that the people behind it are involved in organised crime to go at that level where you're firebombing or setting premises on fire, ram raiding, setting people's homes on fire, cars or what have you. It certainly casts a bit of a shadow or blight over what is quite an upmarket place to live. Police are determined to find out who's responsible. Again, it's a question of getting eyewitnesses and finding out if anybody's seen anything and maybe even knows who's responsible.
And a front page by yourself this week, Norman, also revealed that the number of times police fired tasers in Scotland, it soared by 70% in just 4 years. Police are saying that the rise in the use of tasers proves that they need them and that they want a faster rollout of the stun guns. Norman, you spoke to the Scottish Police Federation. What did they say?
Yes, this is a quite controversial issue. The previous report, the Daily Record, that assaults on police officers are at a 10-year high. That more officers are being assaulted on a daily basis. Some quite serious assaults, for example, over the summer period. So 3 attempted murders of police officers in Clydebank, Greenock and elsewhere. And it's got, at the moment, there are around about 2,000 police officers trained in the use of tasers. That's risen in the last 3 years from 520. The Scottish Police Federation would like to see every officer trained in their use and have, a taser available to them when they go on patrol or they go on duty. that's also supported by Chief Constable, Joe Farrell has said she would like a wider rollout of Taser. It's a financial issue because it's obviously quite expensive. The training is expensive and the Tasers are quite expensive. But what we highlighted was that in the last year, what is key here is they've got Taser use and Taser firing. The actual firing incidents had risen by 67% from 156 3 years ago to 261 last year. And that's where the Tasers actually fired. But what we've also seen an increase is Taser use. So that's where the police officer got the Taser, but either will draw the Taser as a kind of precaution or to sort of de-escalate a situation, or will point the Taser. What they can also use, the Tasers we've got what's a red dot. It's like a laser beam, and they can point that at the person to try and de-escalate the situation, almost as a deterrent and as a warning. So we're seeing more Taser use and more Taser firing. Now, people might say, well, that's because you've got more cops armed with them, but the Federation, David Kennedy, General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, says the reason why officers are using them more is because more officers are being assaulted. They'll be given more opportunities to use them. So the police say it's necessary to keep officers safe as a deterrent to attacks. They say it can also de-escalate situations, maybe calm somebody down that's threatening violence to them and the public. So Scottish Police Federation, right behind it, they want to see all officers armed with the Tasers. Amnesty International, human rights organisation, have got concerns. They're not against them per se, but are concerned that this routine rollout, they say they should only be used in special, unique situations. And they're also concerned with the number of times over the years have been used against children. There were a couple of cases. A case a couple of years ago, it was deployed against an 11-year-old at a caravan park down in Ayrshire. People might remember that one. What we do know is that if a police officer fires a Taser, it's reported to the oversight body PERC, who then carry out an investigation. If it's drawn or taken out its holster or brandished but not fired, the officer's got to do a report called a use of force report. So there seems to be there's quite a bit of oversight on it. But the other argument from the police point of view is that actually they're safer than using pepper sprays or even a baton. So definitely it's definitely a watch this space. You know, it's a controversial issue, and I've no doubt we'll see a larger rollout of these Tasers. It would mean the public seeing them being used more often as well.
Absolutely. I think that's us caught up with all the
Thank you very much, Ruth.
Stories. So thank you, Norman, for joining us, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you've got any questions for our team, you can email reporters@dailyrecord.co.uk with the subject line criminal record. You can also subscribe to listen to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts by searching Criminal Record, or you can watch it each week on our YouTube channel.